morning, everyone.
Good morning.
All right, there you go. I know you have a bit more energy in you. It's a busy week, but let's try this one more time. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
All right, that's more like it. Thank you, and a warm welcome to all of you to this really important dialogue on and conversation on Africa's debt and the role of credit rating agencies. To all of you here as well as online, and I do apologize because I'm told the event got filled up very quickly, but I do hope those who couldn't register to join are able to follow online. But I think on the upside, this also means that this is a very important issue and there's a lot of need to have conversations like this one. As she said, I'm Brahima Kulubali, the Vice President of the Global Economy and Development Program here, and it's a program that houses the Africa Program. But before that role, I was a director of the Africa Program, and part of my own research had quickly focused on the issue of debt. In fact, when I joined Brookings, the very first project I initiated was to ask to look closely at Africa's debt situation. This was already back in 2017, before the debt issue even became a mainstream topic of discussion. Right? So back then, what led us to focus on that quickly was two observations. The first one is we noticed that the level of debt was relatively low. Countries were still riding from the effect of the debt forgiveness. But when you look closely, you notice that the debt servicing cost was quite high and even approaching levels during the height of the HIPIC episode, right? So that was concerning. That's first observation. The second observation, the credit base was now more diffuse. It used to be primarily pairs club, but increasingly we're noticing more by official bilaterals, and importantly, increasing share of private sector participants. So then our research thought that these two were related, why the service cost was high and the high share of the private sector. So we looked at some numbers, and then it showed that the private sector debt was responsible for 1/4 of the external debt, but it was making up close to 40% of the debt servicing costs, right? So why? Because it was expensive. Why was it expensive? Because in part, because of the credit rating have an important role to play in that, right? So then we began to then sound the alarm, and then the concern were along three main points. The first one was whether the African countries have debt management framework that are adapted for the new type of debt it was taking on, particularly the private sector debt. And that had three main risks in mind. The first one is the interest rate risks. The second one is the rollover risk. And the third one is the currency risk, given that the debt was being issued in foreign currency. And then the second area of concern was whether this private debt was well adapted for the financing need of Africa's development. For development financing, you usually need debt the loans to be long-term and then on the concessional terms, right? And then finally, the third area of concern is that the international debt resolution restructuring mechanism was not fit for purpose, or at least to handle the new structure of the debt, right? So we began to really push on those three fronts. But even as we were raising the alarm, we were quietly hoping that we won't need those debt resolution frameworks. But as fate had it, COVID happened. And when COVID happened, it accelerated what we all feared could be happening in terms of debt distress. So we worked very closely with the envoys of the African Union at the time and UNECA to push for a debt standstill with the G20. And this is where we came into our first run-in with the credit rating agencies. We were trying all to get a debt moratorium while preserving the hard fought-for credit ratings that the countries had received. But it was a very difficult conversation because the credit rating agency, you just felt like you were talking past each other. They just would not budge on that, right? So then we began looking at a bit at African credit ratings, and then two things come across. The first one is that they tend to be clustered, bunched together. And anybody who's done a lot of statistics would know that that is suggestive that there is not enough differentiation among individual countries by those rating agencies, right? And then the second is that even when you take the same country with the similar fundamentals compared to other non-African countries, they tended to have better ratings, right? So those were, to us, really signs that we need to look at closely the credit rating agency mechanism. So we began to question the methodology, and unsurprisingly, it wasn't too transparent. And worryingly, it had a heavy dose of judgment. So I think for a rating that can have such significant impact on the fate of countries, I believe we all be well served to have more transparency and minimize the subjective judgment. So I was very pleased that our Africa program, in partnership with UNDP, has taken on the project to shed light on this vital issue and to make some recommendation forward and even go a step further to assist the countries. So before I close, I do want to emphasize that today's conversation is very much about the credit rating agencies, but we should not be mistaken to think that it would be a panacea. The debt situation is a symptom, not a cause, and it's a symptom of a deeply seated structural challenge, and that is the lack of adequate financing for Africa's development, long-term concessional financing. Investment needs are very large, and that is against the backdrop of very low domestic saving rates. That is the structural issue. So we should focus on the debt today because it's pressing, but we shouldn't lose sight of that, because even if we solve the debt issue without solving the underlying structural issue, it's only a matter of time before the debt rises back again and we face another crisis. But in the quest then for that development financing, I think countries should be very measured in how much they rely on private sector debt. Private sector debt is certainly important. It's an inevitable part of the country's development journey. It provides diversification in terms of sources of funding. And importantly, too, it subjects a country's economic policies to the discipline of markets, right? So those are all welcome dimensions of the private sector debt, but countries just need to be really measured in how much they want to rely on it for development financing. So then on this work, we've really valued our partnership with the UNDP, and I especially want to acknowledge and thank Auna Ezekonwa, who is the UN Assistant Secretary General and Director of the Regional Bureau for Africa, and the Chief Economist of UNDP for Africa, Raymond Gilpin, who is not here today, but I do want to acknowledge him. We've had a long-standing working relationship even before he went to UNDP, and we've always been pleased with that collaboration. And we've assembled, of course, a very distinguished panel here of ministers who are at the forefront of these issues on the ground in Africa. And then we really aim to learn from your individual experiences and see to what extent that can help inform our research agenda. So with those words, let me just run you through the show. After this, we'll hear from the Assistant Secretary, and then my colleague Aloysius, who was our previous director for the Africa program, will moderate the panel, and then we'll turn then to Jean-Claude Chachuan, who will share some parting thoughts. So with that, please join me to extend a warm welcome to the Assistant Secretary General to the podium.
Let me see if you're still awake. Good morning. Yeah, I think Dr. Coulibaly woke you up, and hopefully everyone had a chance to have some coffee. What a beautiful room. Thank you all for being here, really, to reflect on this very important topic with us. I really want to start by thanking you, Dr. Coulibaly, for hosting us and your team. It's been a long-standing partnership with Brookings on this topic. We were here also last year discussing the same subject. And I want to thank the ministers who have assembled very busy schedules that they have, but they've prioritized this, and of course all our partners in the room, AfriCatalyst, ACET, and GFANZ, who are really coming together. I want to recognize also my brother, who is the Executive Secretary of ECA, working with ECA on this topic. It's been a great pleasure. And, you know, why are we talking about debt as UNDP? The UN Development Programme is about development. And I think here today we're connecting this issue with development, because at the end of the day, it's about giving countries the capability, the capacity, and the means to meet their development needs and to support their populations in a very trying time. You know, as head of Africa Bureau in UNDP, there is one thing that does keep me up at night. It is the way Africa is perceived by the world. It is this sort of negative perception that filters into risk ratings or the pricing of risk that really, I think, has done Africa in terms of its slow development trajectory. And I think this is why we're embracing this issue of the cost of borrowing. But it also affects investment on the continent. I've just been on a trip to Europe, and I can see that Africa's narrative is changing, and the world is increasingly recognizing the value of this continent beyond perceptions of it being a recipient of aid and charity. I think there's a greater recognition that this is Africa's century, and indeed, we're looking at a continent that will produce the vast majority of the future workforce, but also a continent that is hosting the bulk of the mineral resources that are needed to power a net zero world. And, but also a continent that has much more to offer in terms of its cultural values and humanity overall. So how the world views Africa and how Africa views itself becomes quite critical. And we are trying to make that transition because it's connected to our ability to actually overcome poverty on the continent. Africa cannot continue to be the poster child for global poverty because then investors also look at Africa in that light. So today we want to talk about credit ratings, and it's just one aspect of this perception issue. And at UNDP, we discovered that there is a link between subjectivity in the ratings and the credit worthiness as priced by credit agencies. And one key solution to this is that we increase objectivity. But that we are not just talking about it, we're actually doing something about it. And for us, it's meant looking into creating awareness, first of all, among countries in Africa, of the importance of this. Because the losses that accrue as a result of not being rated correctly, it's massive. It's much more than Africa receives in aid. There is much more capital fleeing the continent than coming into the continent. Everyone talks about opportunity on the African continent, but the investment, capital flow, is not meeting that opportunity. So you take renewable energy, for instance. This is a huge opportunity for investors. And we know that Africa is hosting a lot of the renewable energy capability. But Africa received less than 2% of investment in this sector in 2023. Why? And a lot of people you ask will say risk. The perception of this high risk is strangling capital and holding it from reaching the continent. The implication of that is joblessness on the continent, but it's also the continent's inability to service social sectors and development sectors, health, education, and the like. In terms of the implications, you talk about servicing the interest on debt. And high interest payments mean that countries are not able to meet their obligations in the health sector, in the education sector, in the critical human capital development sectors. So it's important that we begin to see more African countries who are rated higher. So there were 20 downgrades in the world, credit downgrades, in terms of ratings last year. Of those 20, 10 were from Africa. So Africa made up 50% of the downgrade. So it's critical for this continent. In terms of upgrades, there were 43, and Africa had only 4 of those. So what we're talking about here is very particular for Africa. So I think for us at UNDP, as I said, we want to see a difference in 3 or 4 different areas. One is data. We know that we can do better in terms of the generation of data, comprehensive data, but also we know that credit rating agencies can be challenged to improve the criteria with which they use to assess countries, to include other assets that African countries have, like carbon credits. Why isn't that a criteria that you use to assess a country's credit worthiness? But we also know that it's important for African countries to have the capacity to actually understand the process, the methodology, and therefore be prepared when they're being rated to interrogate the process. Dr. Coulibaly talked about the methodology. Why is it that this is just taken for granted? So the methodology is what it is. Do we know what it is? Is there transparency around it? And do African countries have a say in the various mechanics that are in there? So lots to do around this issue. And we're so pleased that as UNDP, we now have a program around this to deliver on these key actions that will help countries see better rating that then could reduce their interest rates, but also improve their chances of getting FDI into the various sectors that are critical. And we really want to hear from our ministers today to hear where the shoe is pinching, but also the developments that are happening on the African continent that will tell a different story about risk. That credit rating agencies and all of us in this room need to start communicating and using as a benchmark to have a different relationship with Africa on this issue of risk. So really pleased to be here and looking forward very much to the conversation. Thank you very much.
All right, good morning everyone and welcome to Brookings. Thank you very, very much, Cole and Abuna. This is a great setting to continue the conversation we've been having since last year. My name is Aloysius Uche Odu. I was the former director of the Africa program here. I'm now a non-resident senior fellow here at Brookings. It's a particular privilege, really, really a privilege to welcome such distinguished ministers to our panel. Let me just take you through some housekeeping issues. We know that in addition to the audience here, there are many people online, and we also would like to welcome those online. Please, if online you have a question, kindly email to events@brookings.edu. Those of you on X, you're welcome to tweet at your questions at Brookings Global using the hashtag Africa Credit Ratings. So that's one housekeeping matter. We will have some question and answers from the ministers here, whom I will introduce in a minute. At the end of those conversations, we are delighted, we are absolutely delighted that the Executive Secretary of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, Mr. Gatete, is here with us. There's a lot of talk at the AU and the continental level on this particular subject. So it'd be great to hear his perspectives, his take from the continental level, in addition to the national things we'll be hearing today. As already mentioned by the previous speakers, since time immemorial, we really have had these three, the big three, Fitch, Moody's, and Standard & Poor's, as already mentioned earlier. The dominance of the market, about 90–95%, depending on your source, and so they essentially have become a part and parcel of the international financial architecture. And increasingly, there has been a lot of criticism, some of which you heard today. I'm reminded of the 2008 global financial crisis, when favorable ratings were given to even insolvent institutions, right? Some of us here remember the classic case of Lehman Brothers. And so it's not just an African thing now in terms of, what is going on with these ratings, but the EU has bemoaned, the big three in terms of the way the work is done. China, I understand now, has a number of homegrown rating entities that basically rate municipalities and some of the decentralized parts of the government. India established CareEdge recently, which has successfully rated 39 countries. And the African Union, as I mentioned, is launching one in 2025. This week, just 2 days ago, at the BRICS meeting in Kazakhstan, I understand that the BRICS members have been thinking of ways to collaborate on credit rating. So it's clearly something that, is impacting a number of countries. So the question then is, why is this happening in terms of this sudden critique of the big three? I think Cole and Ahunna mentioned a couple of the reasons. Many of the countries rated just basically feel that they are unfairly treated, right? So that's clearly one reason. Underlying that is the sense of a better appreciation and understanding of their local context, which ought to be taken into account. This is also something that we read about. The UNDP report itself made it very, very clear that the subjectivity in the ratings could be better improved. And of course, the many countries. When I was vice president of the African Development Bank many years ago, or even director at the World Bank, you talk to low-income countries, one of the things you always hear is this notion that at the slightest crisis, they're downgraded. They're too quick to downgrade. So again, these are not my views. These are what countries have shared with us, which is why this is very, very important. And if all these momentum towards establishing more credit rating entities manifest, is competition. And competition is good, right? And so in that sense, it would be really, really useful to hear the perspectives of the ministers here. We've assembled here today ministers from a diverse group of countries. We have the Minister for Lesotho, Madam Matlanyane. Thank you very much for coming. We have the Minister from Rwanda, Madam Rusagara. Thank you very much for coming. We have our brother from Ethiopia, Honorable Minister Ahmed. Thank you very much for being here. And at the end of it all, we will hear the continental perspective, as I mentioned earlier, from the Executive Secretary of UNECA. We will also hear from some discussants and to enrich this conversation. So let's get started. Let me turn to you, Honorable Minister Ahmed. For the first time this century, the Ethiopian government has liberalized its foreign exchange market and floated the bear. Now, this is part of your $10.7 billion package, right, for the homegrown economic reform agenda. The reforms, as we all know, are very, very difficult following the recent downgrade of Ethiopia. Could you share with us the current state of play in terms of Ethiopia's reform as you come out of this, what is clearly a very difficult situation?
Good, thank you very much. I'm also very much happy to join you. I will come back to the questions, but I have also introductory statements. After that, I will come back to you. Right. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude to Brookings Institution and UNDP for inviting me to join the panel discussion on this topical and important topic. I also applaud UNDP, my sister Hona, work that documented the suboptimality of the assessment made by credit agencies and the practical step taken to improve the capacity of African countries to improve the rating. Ethiopia is one of the beneficiaries of this initiative, and I submit our appreciation. Hona has been talking to us about this issue for the last 3 years, and she has been a very important voice in addressing these issues. There are challenges related to credit ratings to African economies, particularly. African countries face challenges accessing affordable development financing due to sovereign credit ratings that often inaccurately reflect their economic strengths. And this is also leading to higher borrowing costs and hindering progress towards sustainable development goals. I share what Ahuna has said, and also previous speaker who articulated it analytically. As African countries began tapping into global financial market to bolster public investment in infrastructure and development, borrowing rates for sovereign bonds averaged more than 6% when the world average hovered below 1%. The debt service associated led to significant strain on the economy by more than doubling the total debt repayment. So the global shocks further worsened debt repayment capacity, leading in many countries a debt crisis. It is to be noted that countries further risked downgrading by credit agencies as they strive and pursue for orderly, timely, and adequate sovereign debt restructuring. I fully share what you said. A little risk, they immediately downgrade you. And that rush to judgment of African economies, there is implicit and explicit biases on the potential of African economies. This created atmosphere of vicious debt trap and also hindered debt resolution that is sustainable and long-lasting. In this context, that Brookings, UN, and other global think tanks, multilateral organizations call for comprehensive reform of the global financial architecture that narrows the financial divide between the global south and developed countries, which eventually could risk a divide in sustainable development, is a very important agenda, and we salute today's engagement to that effort. The effort by UNDP and others should be supported and encouraged to improve the profile of credit risk in African countries. In this regard, it will be productive to engage with credit agencies in the following areas so that there will be fair and accurate assessment of the risk of African economies. One, the improvement of data quality and the metrics is important to assess credit ratings of African countries. In this regard, countries should also engage actively and transparently in providing the necessary data to credit rating agencies on a timely basis. Okay. On the other hand, credit agencies should be transparent with regard to the metrics they use to assess risks and be objective about their context. Secondly, there is a need to strive to improve methodologies for assessing country risk, where African countries have enough understanding and contribution in shaping the tools and methods. Third, on our part, African countries also need to develop a pipeline of credible, productive, and profitable public investment projects that could reduce the risk and enhance the returns. It is important to distinguish between economic and financial returns, which affect the financing source. Africa needs debt for high-quality public assets. Those high-quality public assets often not necessarily should be measured in terms of financial return alone. It should be measured in terms of the development it triggers broadly, in terms of enabling country to move up the ladder of development. Most public investment projects, such as infrastructure, power, utilities, human resource development, have high social and developmental impact, but may not be financially profitable. For example, for the last 15 years, Ethiopia has invested a lot on expanding its infrastructure. Most of them are high-quality infrastructure assets, like Addis Djibouti Railway, the electricity generation, transmission lines, the express roads, and industrial capacity on sugar. All are very productive assets that will trigger diversification of growth, enabling also private sector to participate more broadly in the economy. But this can not only be measured in econometric, mathematical, financial modeling only. No. This has to be fully captured. Hence, Africa should seek also concessional financing to advance toward SDGs, and which is not influenced by credit agencies. When it comes to our recent reform, for the last 6 years, under the leadership of Prime Minister Dr. Abiy Ahmed, Ethiopia has been working on modernizing and transforming its economy through economic reform, through opening up and liberalizing our economy. Its fundamental objective is to transition from state public enterprise-dominated economy to private sector-led economy, and to correct the macro imbalance, to diversify our growth, to sustain our growth, and also to achieve an inclusive and sustainable development. And this is a homegrown agenda. It is our own policies, and we have been working with our development partners for the last 6 years. Now, the last 2.5 months, we have implemented the bold and historic reform of exchange rate liberalization, as well as new monetary policy and fiscal policies, and also enabling more private sector-led growth. This is a consolidation of what we have been doing for the last 6 years. And so it has been fully supported by IMF and World Bank. And the performance for the last 3 months are very positive. This is also a reform which is pro-poor, which will enable an inclusive and equitable development. It's not only liberalizing the exchange rate, it's also increasing domestic revenue mobilization, attracting more FDI, promotion of export, increasing of remittances, and diversifying our source of growth is the main agenda. So we have also significantly worked on mitigating the impact of the reform on the poor people, particularly for low-paying people. And that's why we have increased salary, we are subsidizing essential basic strategic commodities, we are spending on social safety net and all the things. And therefore, it's a well-designed, whole government-led, championed consistently by the Prime Minister. And with our population, which is now 120 million, the largest GDP in the region, neighboring a lot of countries in the Horn of Africa, Ethiopia is now positioned to advance and consolidate its economic transformation and growth by opening up more, and we are ready to leverage more private sector-led growth in the future. And so far, the reform is going very well, and we expect, with our engagement with Ethiopian debtors like creditor committee and bondholders, that is also part of the equation. It will enable Ethiopia to move from high risk to medium risk level in terms of debt profile. This will also significantly position Ethiopia to advance pro-poor inclusive development agenda on the way forward, and contributing a lot, not only to its growth, but also to the regional development and regional economic integration. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think in terms of one of the most populous nations in Africa, I think this notion of a homegrown agenda, I think the continent and people from everywhere else are watching very closely, because these are really far-reaching reforms that you're undertaking. Let me turn to you now, Madam Matlalane from Lesotho. In June this year, Fitch affirmed Lesotho's rating at B with a positive outlook. And I know that as former governor of the Central Bank of Lesotho and now finance minister, talk of top-notch jobs, right, in your country. You've been at the forefront of observing your neighbors in the Southern African Customs Union, SACU, Botswana, Eswatini, South Africa, with much higher credit ratings than your country. What have you learned from your neighbors, right, from their experiences, that will inform your preparation for the next rating of your country?
Well, thank you very much, Louise, and thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate that the UN and Brookings saw it fit to partner in this very important conversation. It's particularly important at this time that we are facing challenges that are unprecedented in the global economy. And more importantly, that the UN system has just approved a pact for the future, and we need to be able to reshape. We have this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to reshape the world and the way the development agenda goes. Indeed, as of June 2024, Lesotho's long-term foreign currency IDR was affirmed at B with a stable outlook. Now, this rating reflects both weaknesses as well as the strengths that our economy has. And on the positive side, Fitch acknowledged that we benefit from strong technical and financial support from multilateral and bilateral partners. And of course, we have a degree of policy certainty and predictability at the moment. And this is reflected, I think, mainly and to a large extent in our commitment to preserving the peg that our currency has to the South African rand. At least we have been very consistent and stable in that regard. Now, on the other hand, our rating is constrained by high levels of debt, weak public financial management, and subdued medium-term growth outlook. And the biggest elephant in the room, political instability, which makes your question quite interesting for me, because as central bank governor, I used to stand on the other side and criticize what politicians are doing. Least did I know that I would be in the same position to be challenged to do the right things for the economy. It's a challenge that I take with grace, and that I really appreciate that I have such an opportunity. So our economy is projected to grow at 2.2% in 2025, and there are a number of large projects that are happening. But I must say that it is true that the ratings that we get work to both influence the volume of debt, or not debt, but the volume of foreign borrowing and resources that we get, but also it also has an influence on the pricing for the resources, the cost of the resources that we get. However, I think I agree with the previous speakers, and I wouldn't want to repeat that there are things that need to be looked into. Issues concerning the objectivity of the ratings, the methodologies, and consideration for the fundamentals of our economies in a deeper way, in a way that really reflects what is on the ground. And of course, limitations concerning data and so forth. I don't think it's fair to say that one size fits all when it comes to these things. So I pretty much agree with the proposal that we've got to look into the ratings in a different way. When it comes to what has been or the trajectory of our neighbors in the south, there's quite a lot that I think we've got to learn. Lesotho has not been particularly stable politically for a very long time, nor have we been very consistent in regard to policy. Being in a monetary union, of course, fiscal policy is the strongest pillar and strongest policy with potency more than any others. But if you take the likes of Botswana is very stable politically. It is notoriously known as a country that has been very stable in politics in Africa. But more importantly, I do recall I studied in Botswana for 2 years some years back. One of the things that I recall vividly was that we used to, I used to be one of those that was saying Botswana is, at that time the mining sector was just starting and it was making a lot of money. And they were not spending that money.
Yes.
They were not spending it, they were saving it. And at that time, they had a myriad of problems, social problems, addressing issues of education, of access to energy, access to clean water, but they were not investing. So what I've seen over the years observing Botswana is the counter-cyclicality of their policy, their fiscal policy. They have been very consistent in that, and they've built reserves, they've built the sovereign wealth fund, and they have managed to smooth intertemporally their growth path.
Right.
And I think this is one thing that we have lacked in the region. So Botswana has been, at least that's what I've learned. The counter-cyclicality of policy, the investment, meaningful investments, as well as the diversification from the diamond sector that has been happening over the years. So large investments in tourism, large investments in agriculture, in financial services have been happening in Botswana, and infrastructure for sure. So this at least is a lesson to me, and a lesson should be a lesson to everyone, that we should have meaningful and impactful policy that we are consistent at. And then public financial management. Botswana has excelled in public financial management with robust policies and a fair amount of transparency, I must say. And we have seen this in Namibia, practicing the same as well as infrastructure development. So these are some of the lessons that I would say are important, not only for us, for Lesotho, but for the rest of African countries.
Absolutely.
And it's interesting because even with this that I'm talking about, rating agencies are not very kind to such economists. So I remember earlier this year, we went to another forum. I think it was the Africa-US Trade Forum. Right. And the president, His Excellency Masisi, had a forum there with private investors, and he was saying, what is it that you are afraid of?
Right.
We're doing everything. We've done everything.
Right.
Tell us what you're afraid of as investors. And I think what they're afraid of is what the rating agencies are saying about our economies, without actually being there and understanding the anatomy and the workings and the fundamentals of how our economies work. If I were to look into Eswatini, Eswatini is one country that has large support from international partners, development partners. So those partnerships have to be leveraged. It has leveraged on them. Yes. We are one country that has such as well, but we have not, I think, in a long time, managed to leverage such partnerships. Okay. Having said that, policy predictability is important. Right. Consistency in policy is important. You've got to have consistent policy and, go at it until you get the results. And I think we're getting that step now. We're getting to that now, and the results are beginning to show. Okay. So these are some of the lessons that I see, but that I hope and I feel countries should be at the minimum, be rewarded for good behavior rather than being penalized even where they are doing good. There has to be some encouragement from the multilateral system to see that where countries are doing well, the system is able to acknowledge that and encourage the countries to do well. So these are some of the things that I would mention. I wish to stop here for the sake of time.
No, thank you. Thank you, Honorable Minister.
I have so much to say about this,
we'll come back
topic.
to those
Thank
also.
you.
Thank you very much. I think our friends from the credit rating agencies are here as well. I mean, if there was one loud and clear message, countries ought to be rewarded for good behavior, not fast to downgrade just at the slightest hint of crisis. So policy consistency is a lesson from your neighbor, and of course, Botswana itself and the governance environment is one that we all admire, not just in Africa, but around the world. Thank you very much for sharing those lessons. Thank you. Honorable Usagara, let me come to you, but the Minister for Finance, Botswana. Fitch has just reaffirmed Rwanda. Sorry, excuse me. Fitch has just reaffirmed Rwanda as B+. Earlier this year with a stable outlook on account of very, very impressive growth potential. Many countries in Africa would kill for your 8.3% growth this year. And the growth has been quite high in the last few years. Your effective governance and the adherence to this rule of law. So as a star performer from the growth perspective on the continent, and hearing what you've just heard today, what is being done to further raise the ratings of your country in terms of the profile?
Thank you very much, and thank you to UNDP, Brookings, and all the different organizations that brought us here today. First of all, it's not just Fitch. S&P and Moody's have also maintained our rating for the last 12 months. And on one hand, we've been able to maintain the ratings because of the strong vision that we've consistently had, long-term vision for economic growth, but also broader development of our people. But matching that with a track record of execution and implementation. And I think it's something that, touching on the point of governance, gives a lot of comfort that the consistent growth is closely followed with the ability to implement on the strategies and the policies that we have. Our strong stability on the macro front, which has been, I think, has been supported by investments in infrastructure, and infrastructure that is supporting productive sectors. So if you look at tourism, for instance, a lot of the gains we are seeing in tourism has been because of consistent investments in the airline, in infrastructure for hotels, for conferences, where Rwanda has become the #2 destination on the continent in a very short time because of a lot of the investments we've made in the infrastructure to support that. And that cuts across to many sectors. From a debt perspective, we've continued to manage debt very carefully. More than 89% of our debt, approximately 89% of our debt is concessional. And we've also been able to tap into climate-related financing.
That's great.
And so this has supported us to keep debt servicing costs low. But this is also increasingly difficult, especially in the high interest rate environment that we've all been experiencing. And I think lastly, transparency, especially on public financial management and very high levels of accountability to support the vision and the track record of growth that we have. But going forward, I think like most countries, we're all facing a lot of challenges. On one hand, we're all being asked to rebuild buffers after all the shocks that we are consistently seeing, which means you need to spend less. But at the same time, you have a lot more development priorities, whether it's in education, health, now climate, which requires you to spend more. And so you need to increase your revenues, but where do you get your revenues? Our revenues are not, given where we are in our development journey, your revenues are not going to grow as fast as the challenges that you're seeing or the climate disasters that we're experiencing. And I think many of us have had to go to the market to complement the concessional financing that we're seeing. And you go to the market and you're paying more. I think the minister talked about Botswana. I think even Botswana pays more than its peers who are similarly rated by their credit agencies. And so you pay more and it undermines your buffers, it undermines the spending that you're looking for. So we really need to, I think as we're talking about these reforms, like the minister said, it doesn't matter how well we continue to do. I think if, yes, we are fixing structural issues in our economies, but those are not issues that you can fix within the 12-month timeline that we will typically see with agencies. And the risk of downgrades, credit rating downgrades that will impact this. So I think that's the balance. And when we talk about reforming the sector, we really need to be looking at also, if countries are making, if you have the right institutions, the right policy framework, if you're making the right bets in terms of long-term infrastructure, there needs to be also, that needs to be taken into consideration as we look at risk ratings for African countries.
Right. Thank you. Thank you very much. Clearly lots to learn, and as you emphasized, for many African countries, even the best performing ones, the needs are enormous. Infrastructural needs, climate needs, human resource, human capital challenges. And of course, this is a particular time when, for countries like Rwanda, dependent on concessional financing, and concessional financing are really, really diminishing as we go forward. And so the onus is on our countries to really be, some of the things you talked about, face those challenges and address in addressing the needs. I would like to turn to the audience who have been very, very patient to take a couple of questions. And the Executive Secretary for UNECA has also been very, very patient. And I think these conversations will help when he talks about the continental perspective of this particular subject. So let's take 2 or 3 questions from the audience. There are mics floating around. If you can just do us the favor of saying what your name is, association, and basically make sure there's a question mark at the end of what you say. Thank you. The microphones? I think I see one hand there. At the back. The first one was at the very back there. Thank you.
Hi, my name is George Collard from Global Markets. I wanted to ask all 3 ministers, how concerned are you about tariffs and the effects they may have on inflation and the Federal Reserve's rate path? Thank you.
Okay, let's take one more, the impact of tariff. Let's go that way. On gender balance. Yeah, that's the young lady at the front there. Great, thanks.
Thank you. Anne Rutledge, I'm an advisor to the Concilium for UNDP in Africa. I've heard many suggestions of things that could make the relationship with rating agencies with a positive impact on your financing goals. But if I could ask each one of you, what is the top suggestion? Because each one requires a structural solution in a way.
Great, great. Let's take those 2 first and come back. Honorable Minister Ahmed?
I'm not clear on the first question. May he say it again, the first?
Okay, the question on tariff. Could you kindly pass on the mic?
Which tariffs? Global tariffs?
Your question again on the tariff?
Sure. I just wanted to ask what are your thoughts on, in a Trump presidency, his tariff policy, the effects it may have on inflation and the rate path and debt sustainability? Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, do you want to take that? And then...
Thank you. Yet we are not a very big or important player on global trade. Our main issue is to attract high-quality investment into Ethiopian economy so that we produce more, we produce variety of products, and we export them well. If you do that, there is enough market already in the world. And stability of global trade is important for all of us.
Yeah.
Global financial sector stability is good. We need to advocate for inclusive global financial architecture that values the role of developing countries. And whatever policies emerge towards that direction is very good for us.
Yeah.
But our main important issue is we need to produce more, export more. For that to happen, we need to attract high-quality investment as well as encourage domestic businesses to produce more. So we are still exporting a lot of primary commodities. We need to add value. We need to industrialize. We need to create high-quality jobs to our economies. And I think that is where our focus should be. And Ethiopia is moving towards that direction.
Yeah.
And just to add to what I said earlier, last year, the economy of Ethiopia has grew by 8.1 percentage point. It's more than double of sub-Saharan African average. You can imagine with the size of our GDP, which is more than 200 billion, with a population which is more than 120 million, the potential of Ethiopia's economy to attract many more investment in its diverse sector of potential is very, very huge.
Yeah.
And the recent full homegrown economic reform will enable us to attract more investment in that direction. And
right.
So that's what I would like to say.
No, that's well taken, point well taken. Sagara?
So maybe to the first and second. On the first, I think with rate cuts, we all would welcome rate cuts. It will bring down the cost of our financing, given that most of our the portion that's dollar denominated.
Yeah.
In terms of what we would want to see change, I think the discussion we're having today is about having an African credit rating agency, which we believe could do two things. One is facilitating cross-border investment flows, even for African investment. Our pension funds, our sovereign funds, our central banks, they also use the three credit rating agencies to make investment decisions. So we're not only looking out foreign capital, we're also looking out African capital. So if African capital is not investing in Africa, then it's also difficult for foreign capital. So if we can level the playing field so that even our own funds can invest across the board, I think that would go a long way. Second, today credit ratings, one, expensive, but the coverage is limited. It's sovereigns. We need, if we're able to have more African credit rating agencies that can cover our state-owned companies, our cities and municipalities, our corporates, that also allows them to unlock domestic and foreign financing, which helps deepen our financial markets, which increases savings. So we'd also want to see the ability for these agencies to increase the transparency for these institutions so that they too can raise more and we can increase the capital that's available.
Great, thank you. I think the question from UNDP was if there was one of the many suggestions, Honorable Minister, if there was one suggestion you make to them.
Yeah, thank you very much. Let me start first with, I think I want to start with that one. Just to add to what my colleagues have said. That
yes.
I think what is important for us as the world right now in the manner and in the space where we are, I think globalization, pushing for globalization, the reversals that have happened have actually hurt the global economy to a large extent. So globalization and policies that are pro-multilateralism would really do a great deal of good to the world economy, be it in tariffs, be it in the financial space, anywhere. But we've got to be able to integrate more.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the one thing, I think from what I see, we have three dominant companies that are doing at least that are doing ratings.
Yes.
The market is too concentrated. That's the problem.
Yeah.
It's too concentrated. We've got to be able to deal with that. We need more entrance into the market to level the playing ground. And not only that, it should be credibility. I mean, for such companies, they need credibility.
Yeah.
So you need strong opponents and strong entrance into the market who can level the playing field. Issues of transparency, issues of objectivity, they will fall. I mean, they'll fall into place like pieces of a puzzle once we have that amount of competition in the market. I think this is a market where credibility means a lot. So whether they are state-owned or owned by multilateral institutions, but they've got to be able to have the necessary skills, necessary muscle to be able to compete effectively, and they will unravel the puzzle very well.
Correct.
And secondly, I want to say, I think this rates first as well. I have two firsts. It's the skills, developing the skills within our economies, within the global financial system, to understand this process of rating and to understand the fundamentals and what is needed, as well as the methodologies, for us to be able to, and understanding the anatomy of the economist, for us to be able to say, yes, the ratings are transparent, the ratings are understandable, and everybody understands. And that will help us a lot. I think I want to appreciate this. You said you're a member of the what did you call it?
The Concilium, yeah,
yes.
sure. Yeah.
That Concilium. If we can have that Concilium and we have that body of knowledge increasing across the spectrum, I think that will go a long way in appreciating and getting the space much more diluted and much more transparent and fair. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let's fit in two more and then take one from the audience before we call on I see it'd be great to have one from the middle so we are fair to every... No, while you're still thinking, I see, over there, just the...
Four.
Okay.
Yes, so my question is to lady from...
If you could, we can't see you, sorry.
Yes, my lady's from, question is from lady from Lesotho.
Okay.
You were talking about relationships, and the Eswatini, that the country you mentioned, Mswati III just got married to Jacob Zuma's daughter. I think, I don't know how many wives he has now. 16, 15, and 45 kids? I don't know, whatever. But anyways, I see as a good strategic move, honestly, while your king has few wives as well. And do you think that could be something, they can replicate, Lesotho can replicate what Mswati did? And also, I want to talk about tariffs. So Ethiopia is a part of BRICS. Even Egypt is. And Trump has said something about BRICS. So can he also throw a limelight on the BRICS, Ethiopia being in BRICS, and de-dollarization strategy?
Okay, so there are quite a few questions in that one. Shall we? Somebody has been very... Oh, we have a hand now in the middle. Sure, great, thank you.
Thank you very much, Doc. My name is Bright Simmons. I'm from Ghana with a think tank called Imani. My question is twofold. One, given that we have 4 good credit rating agencies that are in Africa, based there, have analysts there, why do we need to create a new one rather than help them extend coverage? The second question, which is linked to that, is that one of the challenges is that the African governments do not usually rate their domestic instruments, like the treasury bills and things like that, which does not generate enough business for credit rating agencies. So why don't we fix those things first before thinking about creating a new agency?
Right. Okay. Ministers.
Thank you. On BRICS, Ethiopia is a very proud member of BRICS who have recently joined together with other countries. And for us, the most important thing is the membership of BRICS is important for attracting investment, to trade more. And we're also expecting that partnership will bring additional development, financial support to our economy. And also it's a growing mode of global cooperation, which is not going to replace what is already there, is going to complement existing global cooperations. And it's evolving. And the countries under BRICS, in terms of their economic size and global influence, is very positive trajectory. And therefore, we need to work with all partners globally, whether they are in the East or the South or the Middle. So the most important thing is we believe this is very relevant to our development, particularly with this current exchange rate liberalization. We are expecting advance in terms of attracting high-quality investment. And BRICS member countries can generate more investment to Ethiopia's economy. We can trade more with them. Well, the issue of de-dollarization is not an issue for us. The most important thing is we need to attract investment and produce more, diversify our export, add value, and export to the world, whoever is going to buy, whether it is BRICS or anyone. So the agenda of de-dollarization is not a relevant agenda. For us, the most important thing is, first, we have to produce more, value addition, diversify our export. For that, we need to attract high-quality investment. And the fundamental objective of this reform is to encourage domestic businesses as well as attract high-quality international investment. And the different partnerships, which is globally evolving, are very much relevant for this. And so we work with all partners, whether they are in the East or in the South. The most important thing is development and national interest of Ethiopia. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Did you want to add to what the minister just said?
Maybe I can take the second one. Okay, I think the question on should we be creating new agencies or supporting existing ones? I think at the end of the day, the end game is we want stronger coverage of Africa, and we want coverage that's a lot more reflective of a situation on the ground. And the coverage both, not just for the sovereigns, but for some of the other sub-entities that we've talked about. So would welcome whether that's the new agency, but also supporting some of the existing ones that will take off. I think the goal should be let's start to make sure that the market is a bit more diversified and more can also be held accountable and more transparent. So the principles that were laid out around data, accountability, and so on, I think is what's key. And the how is something that would be less flexible. Is it one agency, or is it strengthening the rest of the ecosystem and making sure we have the right capacity? In terms of our own local stock exchanges, I think for government securities, you're already rated for the most part, and so people rely on that. But how can we, expanding that to other entities is something that we're starting to see our development banks, our local stock exchange companies get ratings from GCR and so on, for instance. And so we want to see more of that to be able to. But again, I think some of the methodologies, even for some of the existing agencies, are still similar to what exists today. So the discussions around data and transparency of process and being more reflective of what's on the ground is what's key, even for what's existing, even those on the continent.
Okay. No, thank you very much, Minister. I think we've heard the perspectives now of the various countries represented on this particular platform. And we've talked about the idea that there is an African momentum towards establishing a continental rating agencies. It's a privilege to really introduce the Executive Secretary of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, Mr. Getete, who's here with us, to share some perspectives on what is happening at the continental level. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. I thought I was just here to listen to the very important people here on the panel because they are the ones who are actually the foot soldiers on the ground. But I think what we are going through and what they are talking about, what it indicates is that the honeymoon is over. We used to have a wonderful time during those old days. Countries used to have access to the concessional resources. If you have a problem, you come to IMF, the World Bank, ADB, so many others, and then you get cheap money. 0.75% for 40 years, and you are happy. You don't need to look for elsewhere. At the same time, for your reserves in the central bank, there was no problem because the aid was too much. It was coming in. So it was coming in foreign currency, and there's nothing to worry about exports and other things because there was incentive of the aid that was coming in.
Yes.
And at the same time, if you are really highly indebted, the HIPIC initiative was very generous. We just had 2 clubs, the London Club and the Paris Club. The London one for the private sector, lending, and then the public, because the Paris Club members would just go there, like-minded people, sit with IMF, World Bank, take a decision. They really help you out, and then you are back again to the normal situation. But now, things have changed. The aid is no longer there. And as countries have grown after the Second World War and after getting independence on the African continent, the resources in terms of concessional resources have not grown at the same time.
No.
Meaning the countries, like now if you take, for example, my friend Ahmed, one project that he's implementing that is big is equivalent to his previous budget for the whole entire institution. Yeah. In other words, as countries have grown, they need more money. But then the resources where you are going to borrow in terms of constitutionality, it's not there.
No.
And then you remember that all this while, actually you have not reached investment grade. You are not well rated.
No.
So if you want to tap into the bigger money outside, you need to be rated.
Yeah.
And that becomes a problem. And to say that really when I say the honeymoon is over, it's not acceptable that today we only have 2 investment grade countries on the African continent, Botswana and Mauritius.
Yeah.
All this while, why haven't we done everything possible to actually reach that level so that we can borrow? And here, when we are talking about the rating, sometimes it's not only government.
No.
It's commercial banks. It's development banks. It is also government at all levels, as my sister here from Rwanda has just mentioned. Very, very important. So we have to accept that. But the situation we are in now is so serious, and these people are the ones who are facing it.
Yeah.
Usually, if you are trying to see, to understand the macroeconomic management, there are 4 key areas. There is the fiscal sector, there is the real sector, there is the balance of payments, and there is the monetary side. Now, to have that equation balance with high indebtedness, where we are telling you, you need to invest in our case, Agenda 2063, the SDGs, and also take care of the social safety net and the rest of it. And yet, the debt is so high that you need to take care of that. And to do that, what do you use? It's your reserves. The reserves, when aid is not coming, it just keeps coming down. And the reserves are meant to support the commercial banks to be able to avail the foreign exchange that we have. So now they start now intervening once in a month or once in 2 months, and then there is high cost because the price will go up and everybody is looking for foreign exchange, which you can't, because central banks have to maintain the 4 months of imports according to the IMF. So now you are really stuck. You are in a very, very, very tough situation. And that's why we are talking about the reform of the global financial architecture, looking at 6 main things. One is the financing, secondly is the debt, third is the credit rating, fourth is the climate, which has come as a shock that is really uncommon and unprepared. This unpredictable expenditure that you have within your budget is so small, the backup is so small, and you are not prepared for that, but also the International Tax Corporation. Yes, the resolution has been passed, but we need to work together to see how this one works out. But also, the most important part is the domestic resource mobilization. This is on our side. And that's why you are saying that now that the honeymoon is done, we need to be attractive. To be attractive, you need to attract investments, and also you need to promote trade. But to attract investments, definitely, you need to be rated. You need to be in good books. And that's why we are talking about the rating here. For the domestic resource mobilization, there is so much that we can do. Yeah. Because right now, really, to understand at this day and age, that we are still on 15.8% tax to GDP ratio on the whole African continent on average. No. It's just too low. It can't take us anywhere. Yeah. And that's why we need to do more. And that's why we've been talking to countries about the capacity, informal sector, which is now on some papers, it is really about 82%. How can you rely on the other small percentage to pay all the taxes and also the digitization? And if you look at the incentives that you give in our investment codes, it's flat. It's not cost benefit sometimes, which we need to change. And also the other leakages, of course, including the illicit financial flows, which is quite high, 88% that is being estimated per year, which is quite high. And now that's why we are turning to rating agencies. Now, last time in New York, I was telling people, because as far as I remember, all countries need money. And in old days, when IMF used to come, all institutions, ministries, agencies, everything, we all wake up. We all realize that IMF is in town. And when it is in town, it means you have to have a house in order, because if you get a green light from the IMF, then everybody, bilaterals, multilaterals, everybody gives you money. Yeah. But when actually the rating agency is in town, the only people know about it is only Ministry of Finance and the central bank. Yeah. That's all. That means for us, we are prioritizing getting the other money, but not actually making ourselves more attractive. Right. And that is, one side is on our side, but also there is the other side. And now they come. One of the biggest problems, they are not like IMF, World Bank, they are not located in each of the countries on the continent. No. So meaning if you're not there, you don't know the dynamics. You don't know what the country is going on in order to build itself. And if you don't have that presence, it means your judgment may likely have some deficiencies. Yeah. And that's where the first thing that the problem. Yeah. Secondly, sometimes they are not also held accountable. They are not regulated. Whatever they say goes and is believed by everybody who is coming to invest. And that's a danger because they can, whatever it is, according to their judgment, if it goes out there, it can either penalize a country or it can reward a country. Right. It depends on how generous they are in terms of really proper assessment in their thing. So it's really, and the transparency, really, they are the ones who know what they are doing. It's not clear that everybody can go there and see this is how we do this is why, this is what we are referring to, and also involving the decisions of the government, understanding why they did what they did. And that's why some countries, as you mentioned yourself, China, Japan, they all have their own rating agencies. India is coming up with their own rating agencies and others. And Africa is also coming with its own. Yeah. But then, I don't know, there is also one thing is, if you are, like you keep getting, a failure, what does the rating agency think? Do you need to come back again to give me another F? I think you need to work with countries to make sure that actually they can improve. Yes. In other words, the capacity that you need to give them so that the next time when you come to rate them, at least you are happy that they have improved. Yes. But being happy just to give you an F, and you come back and you do the same, and that's why I was saying only 2 investment-grade countries is really never enough. Yeah. And that's why we really need to change, I think, the way we do cooperation. Right, now, what we are doing as ECA is simple. We are working with Africa Peer Review Mechanism, really to make sure we bring twice a year a report really on the outlook of sovereign credit rating. We have an e-learning course, which is on website that for ministries of finance, central banks, and others. We also have technical assistance, which is not enough. I would really, and that's why we're going to work together with really my sister Huna, in terms of really scaling up and really focusing on this in a very unprecedented way because of the situation we are in. We need to work with member countries. We need to help them, the member countries in terms of giving them the capacity they need. But I can just say that this is the right time, this is a wake-up call. We need to work with this, the rating agencies to see how we can do business in a different way, because it's all in the interest of all of us in order to move forward. But the situation currently needs the reform of the global financial architecture, and that's why it was included in the Pact of the Future, and now we are moving to the implementation. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. Thank you very much for those remarks. Thank you. I've been told that the audience is so keen to proceed that we have an additional 10 minutes, so if you, we'll take a few more questions. I understand that the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Finance of Tanzania is here. Elijah, do you, I mean, from what I hear from Moody's and the rest of them, Tanzania is seen as the up and coming, right? Do you want to share some thoughts on your country? Thank you. Just 2 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Yes, we have had some quite a good experience with the raters, and I would share some few remarks on that. Yeah. First of all, we have seen some alarming signals on debt crisis in Africa, and many governments which participated in highly indebted poor countries and multilateral debt relief crisis initiative reduced their level of debt significantly after reaching a completion point in 2000. Nevertheless, public debt started to rise again, which was also exacerbated by the economic hardships arising from the pandemic. Rising debt, public debt level has made debt liquidity ratios to deteriorate, which was also worsened by surging interest rates in advanced economies. Subsequently, IMF suggested that more than half of the region's low-income countries were either in debt crisis or at high risk of debt distress at the end of 2023. This could also be witnessed by some countries in our region to be involved in recent debt restructuring initiatives in like common framework agreement. This has led to countries downgrading from rating agencies, making the situation worse because it raises cost of external financing and subsequently increasing refinancing risk of maturing Eurobonds. Now, from the improved credit ratings, which can provide a pathway to tackling African debt crisis, what we see, the upgrades provide several benefits to the domestic economy. The key benefits, among others, are lowering the borrowing cost to implement public investment and refinancing debt maturing obligations and attracting foreign direct investment. Lowering borrowing cost to the government makes loans to be affordable, which is very crucial on credit rating analysis. In addition to that, FDI creates more employment opportunities and brings hard currency.
If you could wrap up, because, you know.
Thank you very much. So what we have done in our country and what has led to the rating to improve. Tanzania benefits from having a large and diverse economic base with multiple sectoral engines of growth that reinforce our resilience. These multiple sectors include agriculture, tourism, logistics, construction, mining, financial services, and a continued improvement in investment and business environment. And with the new prospects confirmed, for example, the FDI of $3 billion in the next 3 years, and also in gas of $42 billion. So the economy has provided a low growth volatility, as well as a low and a stable inflation in our country. So that's
I think
what
those are
positive.
no wonder you're seen as up and coming by the rating agencies.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for sharing those. I'm afraid we've run out of time. I would like to call on John Claude, one of our collaborators, to make some closing remarks to close it out. Thank you very much. Honorable Ministers, well done. Thank you. Thank you very
much. Honorable Minister, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, I'm honored to co-host this important event alongside UNDP and the Brookings Institution. The discussion we have had today reflects the challenges and the opportunity faced by African countries, particularly in the quest for more equitable access to development finance. I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to all of you for your insight contribution and dedication to addressing this critical issue. Allow me briefly to summarize some of the key takeaways from today's event. I think our discussion today, it was said that this is one, this discussion is one aspect of the perception issue. How the world view Africa and how Africa view itself becomes very critical. The perception affects the level and cost of investment, and we really need to change the narrative. We need to tell a different story about the risk.
Yeah.
I think another takeaway is that the issue of rating is not only an African issue. But when it comes to Africa, I think there is a lot of subjectivity. And we don't see really a lot of differentiation when it comes to rating African country. And there is also a rush to downgrade when there is a crisis. We cannot accept one size fits all for all the country in the continent. And I think also it was mentioned that it is not acceptable that in all the continent we have only 2 investment grade country. So there is also a mention that we need to improve the data quality and the extending of the methodology of the rating agency. And that is really key to improving credit rating for the country in the continent. It was mentioned also consideration for the fundamentals of our economy, policy predictability, consistency, and also the creation of a credit agency or the supporting of existing one. It was also mentioned that we should focus, of course, on credit rating because this is the issue of debt is pressing, but that the fundamental problem is the lack of adequate financing for the level of for African development. And we don't have enough concessional finance, and we need more resources to finance our development. And finally, I think it was mentioned that really there is a lifetime opportunity to reshape the international financial architecture, and that we should seize this opportunity to change things.
Yeah, thank you.
So as we have heard, African continent are grappling with significant debt stress, amplified by factors such as high costs of borrowing, declining concessional finance, and global disruption. These challenges are not only threatening the fiscal stability of many nations, but also impede progress toward achieving development sustainable goals. The discussion today reaffirms the need for a collective approach, one that brings together multilateral institutions, the private sector, and NGOs to create innovative and lasting solutions. One recurring theme in our discussion was the importance of improving sovereign credit rating. As we know, credit ratings are instrumental in determining the cost and accessibility of financing for African nations. Yet, as I highlight, many African countries face unfairly low rating, often driven by subjective assessment and external factors beyond their control. This contributes to unnecessary high borrowing costs, exacerbating the debt burden of these nations. In this context, it is in this context that AfriCatalyst, in partnership with UNDP, has launched the African Rating Support Initiative. This initiative is designed to help African countries navigate the credit rating process more effectively and improve their rating, learning to lower borrowing costs and unlocking more affordable financing for sustainable development. As outlined earlier today, this initiative comprises 3 key components. The first is the African Credit Rating Resource Platform. It is a central hub for data, methodology, and experts to support African governments in their rating preparation. The second is a consortium of credit rating experts, former sovereign credit rating professionals offering technical support to assist government officials during their rating and review process. And the third is a community of practice. This is a collaborative network that enhances the capacity of African officials, regulators, and market actors to engage effectively with credit rating agencies. Yeah. These efforts are already yielding results. Since the launch of this initiative, we have successfully conducted capacity building workshops with government representatives from Tanzania, Kenya, Uganda, and Ethiopia, and engage in strategic discussion with senior officials across the continent. We believe this initiative will play a pivotal role in reducing the cost of borrowing for African nations and ultimately improve the access to the financing need for sustainable growth and development.
Thank you.
Yeah. In closing, I would like to emphasize that today's discussion are just the beginning. The path ahead requires continuous collaboration and innovation, and AfriCatalyst remain fully committed to working with partners like UNDP, the Brookings Institution, and all of you here today to build a stronger financial future for Africa. Thank you again for your time, your insight, and your dedication. Together, we can transform this discussion into meaningful action that supports African development agenda.
Thank you. Thank you, Jean-Claude. And a round of applause for the ministers who have shared. Thank you. Thank you very much.